Good morning. We're back in action. Agriculture. We're going to spend some more time on S323, our miscellaneous bill. We're going to talk about Section 10. I think it's very important to understand that this committee has not made any decisions on anything. We do have a wish to keep our ag land protected, our prime ag land protected. This bill has come before us. We are taking testimony, and we are just trying to figure out if there's a path forward. So we had a little heated and contentious day on Friday, and I want to avoid that. I really do. I just want to have a discussion to everybody's position, and everybody will be heard, everybody be respected and honored. And I'd like to keep that conversation in that way. We're going to start off talking with Steve Collier, General Counsel, Agency of Agriculture, Food Markets. And the agency is going to tell us where they are at this point. Counsel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you all, senators, for having us here. I know there's a lot of witnesses, so I'm going to try to do this very quickly, but I'll stay around if you have any follow-up questions. I'm happy to try to help. But I think it's a lot of things that's important here. But from our perspective, there are sort of three big principles that come into play, and that's what makes this such a tricky subject. First of all, agricultural soil. It's a critical resource. It doesn't regenerate quickly, if ever, and we need it to grow food. So it's sort of hard to overstate the importance of having agricultural soils in Vermont so that we can have farms. Another critical principle is renewable energy. Not everyone agrees, but I think most people in Vermont certainly agree that renewable energy is important for our future. Being able to generate energy without emissions is certainly, at least in our estimation, better for the planet. And I think that's certainly widely held opinion or belief in Vermont. So there is a need to develop those resources so that we're not creating more emissions. So and solar is one of those resources that can be found almost anywhere. And so from that perspective, it's quite a useful type of renewable energy. I think another issue that really is at the fore of this, at least from our perspective, is private property rights. So private property is not anywhere near as open to being used as it used to be. I mean, there's no question, if you look at our history, that the ability to use your own property from what it was 100 years ago to today is vastly diminished. There's a lot of well-intentioned and sometimes very good policy reasons for that. But there's also no question that being able to use your own land is something that some people feel very passionate about. Some people, especially in rural communities, that's all they have. And we lose sight of that sometimes. With land, when you live in an apartment building or you live on a quarter acre downtown, you have a very different relationship to the land than when you live for sometimes centuries on a certain parcel of land, and that's how you support yourself, your livelihood, your family. So telling people what they can and can't do with their land, obviously, when the government does that, it needs to be thoughtful and has to have a balanced approach. So you take those three things together: private property rights, the need to have agricultural soils, and the need for renewable energy. It's a pretty big challenge. And what we do currently is we implement the system that is in place. And I do think that agricultural soils are protected in that system somewhat. They are in, and so solar goes through Act 248, which is the PUC, Public Utility Commission. Through that process, all energy projects in the state have to go through that. Solar does that as well. And if you destroy agricultural soils in an energy project, you have to pay for that. You have to pay for what you destroyed so that other land can be conserved elsewhere. And generally, it's at 2 to 3 times the rate of what you're destroying. So normally, if you're destroying 10 acres, you've got to pay enough so that the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board can buy 20 to 30 acres somewhere else to have a conservation easement so that that land will be preserved. That's the balance that we currently have. That is true in solar when there's a permanent impact. So if a cement substation is being built on a solar energy project, then, and say that takes a quarter of an acre, then a solar developer will have to pay for that quarter acre of lost soil. However, most of soil is in open space, open field, and it needs to be in a clear space to get the developing energy from the sun. So if you look at a 20-acre solar development where what's all on field, solar developers are not paying for that lost 20 acres of soil that's there. However, there is a legal in the law. There's something that says that whenever you put solar on prime ag soil, that prime ag soil remains as though it was never touched. So what it's saying is that that it's prime ag soil even when there's a solar field on it. And when you get a certificate of public good from the PUC, there's a required decommissioning as part of that project. So every solar field that is put in place is supposed to be coming out at some point in the future. And when that does, that field is still supposed to be prime ag soil. I call that. Yeah.
What was the genesis of that? That law?
Well,
I just, because it just seems like, now I understand we have to have conservation. But why was that a set aside?
I wasn't at the agency at the time that was put into place, but I think it was designed, from what I understand, to accomplish two things. One is to facilitate solar development so that instead of having to pay a potentially huge mitigation fee, you don't have to pay that. And I think, to be fair, I think on the flip side, it's also to protect agricultural soil so that eventually it could return to farming. I think that was the goal. But I sort of call it a legal fiction sometimes because we believe that that's what's in state. That is what's required under the law. None of us knows what's going to happen in 25 years, 50 years. Is, in my opinion, it's at least as likely that will continue to be solar, especially if solar continues to be how we generate electricity, then likely it will just be replaced with new panels and a new CPG will be issued, but we don't know. And maybe it will, maybe it won't. Maybe solar will stop being something that's valuable and it will all revert to agricultural land. I think the issue that so many people have is we don't know. And so when you're saying that this is still prime ag soil and we never have seen an instance where a solar field is removed, that's a tenuous bet to rely on for the future of farm soil.
And Counselor, I guess I almost can understand staying prime ag. It's the length of time. It's 2.5 decades. I'd like to think I'd be alive. Probably not. And so
I'm betting on him.
well, thank you. I appreciate it. So if that 25 years, and that's the issue that I'm running up against, is the length of time. Not even if it's going to be prime ag afterwards. It may be, and it could be, and we haven't seen any evidence of that because it hasn't been 25 years. So I'm struggling. That's the part I'm struggling with probably more than anything. I want to see solar fields and I want to see conservation, and I think it's important, but it's just that length of time that I'm struggling with.
I'm struggling with Senator Major, but it's this. We have plenty of land to put solar on. And I've said it over and over and over, stay off of our prime ag land because again, you tie it up. This whole bait and switch thing as far as, well, we're going to take this, but we're going to go over here and conserve that land. Well, why don't we just conserve it all? I mean, why do we have to do that bait and switch? I don't get that. And I get it. And I want renewable energy. I want to get to a few facts that I think that we know. Act 250 was put in place to protect prime ag soil, to protect farming. Since Act 250 been put in place, I think we lost 57% of our prime ag land.
I think it's about 56 senators, what I remember, not of our prime ag land, of our harvested crop land. So land that the state of Vermont is actually using to produce crops. Yes.
There's a number floating out there that we've lost 41,000 acres in a period of time. And do you know what that number is? I've seen the 41,000. I just can't recall. I meant to look it up before the meeting and I did not.
I know in the last USDA census period, which is a 5-year term from 2017 to 2022, that we lost 11% of our agricultural land during the harvested cropland. Again, it's not primary soil, but actual used cropland. And that might be around that number. We have a little under 500,000 acres currently being used to grow food crops in Vermont, I believe, which is about 9% of Vermont, which is by far the lowest it's been in our, our farming history.
So let's do the math. 11%, 5 years time that we've lost. We are less than 20 years away from losing it every bit of it.
There's a certain amount, over 200,000 acres, I believe, that's conserved through permanent conservation easements. So there is some that is protected as well as it can be. That doesn't necessarily mean it's used for farming currently, but it does mean it can't be used for other things and it can't be ruined. But you're right. The reason Act 250, as I understand it, was implemented was we lost about half of our farmland in the preceding 40 to 50 years. And so people were nervous about that. At that time, we had about 420,000 people. Now we have about 640,000 people, and we've sort of about gone up at about 50% of our population, and we've lost more than half of our cropland during that time. So it's a big concern. When you talk about, like, it is not an infinite resource, and the flip side of that is, it is somebody owns that property and then trying to decide what to tell people they can do with it. I think it's a really complicated issue, and I think there's a balance that's in place right now that, at least in theory, is workable, but that doesn't mean it's the right balance. I think it's always worth looking at the balance. Is this the right way? Is there a better way when you're taking ag land out of production to do something about that? Is there a better way to incentivize not being on ag land? I think one of the things that frustrates us the most is that a lot of the times the reason it goes on ag land is because it's relatively flat and clear. So it's more of an economic basis, and which is not to say that we don't have to consider economics in our economy. We all pay for electricity. None of us wants it to be, more expensive. That's a cost of doing business. So, but when those trade-offs are tough, and I think everyone agrees that when you can put solar on rooftops and parking lots, that's a win-win. When you're taking ag land out of production to do it, that's a much more complicated analysis. And it would be wonderful if all of the solar panels could go on an unused hillside instead of a flat, perfect ag field. I don't think it works very well on the hillside because you don't get sun for most of the day. But anyway, there are some really important issues, and it is worth, we don't know how to fix it, but we know it's worth consideration, and it maybe could be done.
That's why I'm going for it. Don't lose your thought. So if it's not hurting the land, I'm more of a comment than it is anything. And it's not gonna be, we don't have the right people in the room to even talk about it, but we have people in the room that are gonna have a lot to say. If it's not hurting the land in any way, shape, or form, maybe we ought to find a way to put it on what we would call some of the wetlands that we have, or the wetterlands that we have. If it's not hurting the land, the flatter areas that are cropping ducks, but are probably grow a few weeds on there that are susceptible to wetter land. So just to comment on that, I just want to Senator Heffernan, go ahead, because I have some more to say about that.
So when it comes to solar, I think the issue is sometimes where solar goes, because there's not anybody that doesn't say, hey, we shouldn't have solar. From what's happened in other towns, that either solar project people are like, well, my phase 3 is here, this makes the most sense, most cost effective. Well, that's what I'd look at if that's what I was doing. However, as we do this, they should be put through the same gamut that if I was going to put a housing development there or a industrial project there, which they're not. They don't, which I don't believe is right, because it does affect the land. It may change in 25 years. That's 25
They don't have a
years.
3-acre rule that everybody else has to comply with.
Just having to go through the same gamut. And what I've heard is, well, if we have to do that, it's no longer cost effective for solar to go there. And it's like, well, guess what? A lot of industry said, I want to put my building there. Oh, now I got to go through Act 250 and all the stuff they want to do. Now it's no longer cost effective. let's just have it all on the same playing field, that wherever you go, that the town has an input. I know what's happened up in Lowell. I totally understand why the solar company wants to do it. They have phase 3 right there, and it's perfect setting, but it's not a perfect setting for the town, and that should be accounted for. Does that mean the farmer can't sell it? No, I'm all around the farmer should. I want to put solar there because they're giving me the best price. Well, then it's up to the people of the town to say, either if you found somebody to come and buy it at the same price. But my biggest point here is that if solar comes in, they should have to be put through the same regulations that if it was industrial or a housing project or total cost effect, go through Act 250 and let people have their say. Other than that, farmland, I drove around this weekend and it'll be a long time before we chew up all our farmland. Honestly, it's not going to disappear in 20, 30 years. All of us, people live up in Northeast Kingdom. I've lived down Addison County. It's changed some, but the major fields are still being farmed. And I'm concerned about it, but not to the point that we're at critical mass that we're going to lose this land to solar fields or housing, or it just, Vermont's made it too hard. It's not going to happen overnight. But when it comes to what we're talking about solar today, it's just, yeah, you can be solar, but you have to go through the same gamut that any industry has. And that'll end it right there for a lot of it, because
You do get into the part of it as far as where that Lowell project is again. And I just want to really emphasize that we are just having a wide ranging discussion and we're going to get everybody in. I promise everybody's going to have a say. But you do get into what is best use. When you talk about that Lowell project, is the best use of that land solar? Because if the town's ever going to expand, that's where they would expand their housing into the same area. So I think a lot of that comes into it as well. I don't want to get too far on the weeds of it. I just got a couple more questions and committee as well. Does the agency have a say on these projects when a large vast of ag land is going to be consumed in one of these projects? Are you consulted in any way? You have a say in it?
We are required to participate in the bigger projects. We have a right to participate in all the projects. And what we focus on is sort of either temporary or permanent impacts at Primac soil. So if it's a temporary impact, we weigh in to require the developer to mitigate any temporary impact. If it's a permanent impact, then we talk about offsite mitigation and those fees. So something like a road may go in as temporary. It may have geotextile fabric underneath it to prevent soil compaction. There's reclamation guidelines if any soil is disturbed. So a lot of what we're doing is to ensure that the soil that is there is protected as well as possible. Permanent impacts where you're never going to get the soil again have to be compensated for. So we have a say, but it's on Primac soil, and it's somewhat limited by that legal proclamation that it's still Primac soil. So it's not considered to be destroying the soil, which in theory, again, is perfectly legitimate. In practice, it may not.
Last thing I want to say, and then again, committee, please, I'm not shutting down discussion, but we'll get to our witnesses, we have talked a lot in this committee about property rights by owners. And that is, I'm sure we're gonna hear that today when the testimony that we have. And that weighs on us heavily, when we talk about all of this issue. And we talk about that a lot. As somebody that's owned, hundreds of acres at times, and all that, I choose to do what I want to do with the property. It's never in current use, or that's just what I do. But everybody has their own feelings about what they do and how they've done it. And I've never had anybody tell me what I was going to do with my land. And so that is not our intent, although it sounds like it is a little bit. So we're just, again, we're taking testimony, we're listening, and we're a long ways from nothing. But we have a pretty good discussion going. And so,
Can I just throw in one quick thing that I wanted to mention, that there's also agrivoltaics, which is the combination of solar and agricultural practices. We've been excited about that, want to encourage that. It's not particularly robust in Vermont yet, but there are some examples of it. Some of it can be grazing, like with sheep. Others can also be growing certain kinds of vegetables, root vegetables or leafy greens. Actually, the shade from the solar panels can be helpful. It's more labor intensive often, but the only point is it's worth knowing that there are ways to combine the uses, which, you know, is obviously better than when you're completely taking it out of production. It's not been heavily adopted in Vermont, but there are some people doing it. And we always encourage that to the extent that we can, because that's fantastic. If you can actually still use the land productively for agriculture.
Do we know what states are using it or where?
From my memory, I don't have a tremendous amount of knowledge on this, but I think California has done some pretty important work, and we have people in the agency though who know much better than I do.
Thank you.
And
Sure.
we did have Peter Sterling in here, and he's out of town, I guess, now. But you know, again, we listened to everyone, and it was his estimation that we're only using 409 acres of prime ag land. I don't. It seems a small amount. And I'm seeing what Senator Heffenan's observations are driving around. It's, you know, it's hard to know what that number is, but it just seems like if that's all that's being impacted, that we have plenty of other areas to put that type of solar panels, whether it's over parking lots or buildings, land that isn't, you know, pasture lands that wasn't able to be, don't have to be hillside or rocky, but maybe it just wasn't good at growing crops at that point in time. So we are, you know, again, we're looking for a lot of conversation to happen. Counselor, anything else that you would like to add?
No, I really appreciate you taking time to consider this issue because it is, yeah, sorry.
So one of the provisions in section 10 is that the Agency of Agriculture being a required party in any sort of siting situations. Is the agency in favor of that?
I mean, we don't think we need it because we already have the right to intervene in any case where there is one. And so, and also that might require that we need more people than we have currently. Just because, so it's, you know, it's not as simple as just saying we should be. I think we want to be there whenever it's important for us to be there. We don't, if a parcel doesn't have any prime ag soil, there's no reason for us to be involved. So I think we're comfortable with where it is.
Okay.
But obviously, if the standards change, then our role in that process might change as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Ready? Are we good to move on?
Yep.
I've got a list of people here. I'm just gonna start from the top and go down to the bottom. I'm gonna try to prioritize the people that haven't spoken to us yet. And so the first person that I have on my list is Ben Walsh, Climate and Energy Program Director for Vermont Public Insurance Research Group. Welcome, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come in. For the record, Ben Edward Walsh, as you said, with Meadberg. I'm trying to try to share my screen here. Oh, great. So I decided not to bury the lead. I am here for a few reasons, but right at the top of that list is the fact that if this were enacted, it would drive up the cost of electricity in the state of Vermont. We also have concerns about it making it harder to build solar, about climate impacts. But you know, really, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in additional costs for Vermont ratepayers if this were to be enacted.
Well, let me add though, you haven't been too concerned about that because you guys are already driving up costs because you're getting 21 cents per kilowatt hour. I think now it's getting down to 16 and you know, you can buy it on the open market for 6 cents. So you guys have driven up costs already. So are you really concerned?
We are, in fact. Vermont has been seeing its electric rates obviously go up, as they are everywhere in the country, but go up less than the rest of New England, in large part because of investments that Vermont has made in things like efficiency and renewables. We are now the lowest rates in New England. We fully admit that the renewable energy standard that we supported, both the 2015 version and the one that was updated a couple of years ago, will have some upward pressure on rates. We did everything we could to minimize that in that bill, but it is getting it real bad. It is reducing carbon pollution dramatically. It is getting a lot of renewables built. This bill, in our estimation, and I can get into why this is the way we see it, would drive up rates with no discernible benefit to Vermont ratepayers, unlike the Renewable Energy Standard, which does have benefits to Vermont ratepayers and the world at large. So specifically, why I would drive up rates really boils down to economies of scale. Tier 2 of the Renewable Energy Standard requires that 20% of Vermont's electricity by 2035 come from newly built renewables in the state. Some of that's already constructed. Some of it's underway now, but something like half of that number would be constructed under this bill if it were to be enacted. This requirement in that law is that those projects qualify for that portion of the law be no larger than 5 megawatts in size. That's roughly 25 acres. The section 10 limit of 5 acres, as you heard from the Public Utilities Commission, Mr. Faber last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, essentially this would ban all solar in the state above 1 megawatt in size. I think there's some caveats to that, but largely that would not be happening anymore. And those projects are substantially more expensive than 5 megawatt projects, simply because of economies of scale, as you have with almost anything else. I looked at data from the National Renewable Energy Lab, other states in the Northeast, Massachusetts. When you're looking at those two size categories, and this data is not precisely 1 versus 5 megawatt, but it's close. You're talking about a third more expensive in Massachusetts, also about a third more expensive in New York. Renewable Energy Vermont estimates that it would be 18% more expensive in Vermont, though I think that's a pretty conservative estimate. So to the extent that the Renewable Energy Standard dictates the amount of renewable energy that's being built in the state, and this bill would increase the cost of that renewable energy, it will drive up rates. If you add that all up, and there's a couple of ways to do the math, I don't have all those equations right here in front of me, but over the life of the systems installed over the next 10 years, it would be hundreds of millions of dollars in additional costs of Vermont ratepayers. I also want to talk a little bit about conversion of farm land to other uses. The American Farmland Trust, and this data is from some testimony they gave about a month ago to House Ag, and some modeling that they did several years ago on solar specifically. They estimate that about 41,000 acres of ag land will be converted away from ag land in the state of Vermont by 2040, and that 1,200 acres of that would be solar, converting ag land. I actually think that number is probably 50 to 100% higher than 1,200 acres, because that analysis was done before the Renewable Energy Standard was updated in 2024. So we'd be talking about more like 2,000 of those 41,000 acres being from solar. So we're talking 3 to 6% of total farmland conversion coming from solar. I do not want to diminish the very real downsides of farmland conversion, but when we're talking about that as an issue, focusing on solar is focusing on 3 to 6% of the problem and leaving the other 94 to 97% of the problem alone. The other thing here is this actually wouldn't reduce farmland conversion for solar. It would have the effect of fragmenting, which, as you know, anyone in this sort of space knows, fragmentation generally has its own impacts, its own negative impacts. So the Department of Public Service estimates that over the next 10 years, every year we'll need 40-ish to 50 megawatts of solar per year to be constructed in the state to meet state law. Assuming maybe 10 or 15 megawatts of that is from net metering, small solar on rooftops and backyards, that sort of thing. And maybe 5 megawatts is from other solar. You're talking about 30-ish megawatts of solar per year from these 5 megawatt projects. 5 megawatt projects because those are the most cost effective. So that's generally the size that is being built in the law because it's the cheapest. Utilities are looking for the cheapest power that could meet the law. So keep rates down for ratepayers.
Nationally, what is what is the construction of solar doing? I mean, might it be cheaper for us to buy the glut of solar power that's being put up naturally versus to take our own lands and to produce it at a higher cost?
So the Renewable Energy Standard contemplates that. Some of that is not deliverable to the state of Vermont. Obviously, if you're talking to Texas or California or something, that those electrons are never reaching Vermont. You can't have a contract for them, really. It does have a separate tier of new renewable energy that's required, that is required from the region, which is New England plus adjacent areas where you can deliver the power. So roughly Quebec and New York. That is an additional 20%. And so the idea behind the Renewable Energy Standard is making sure we're getting some renewables built here and giving the utilities flexibility to get an additional amount of renewable energy from potentially Vermont, potentially other places. Hopefully some of that would be things like offshore wind. It could be larger solar or wind here or elsewhere in the region.
But this 42 to 50 that you're talking about in this time frame is all if we constructed every bit of that in Vermont.
It's tier 2. So there's tier 2, that's 20%. And then there's an additional tier that's also 20%. So that 42 to 50 megawatts is specifically what's called tier 2, which is the in-state up to 5 megawatt renewable tier of that. Anyway, so boiling this down, and I know you have a lot of witnesses. I want to get to the end of my presentation. If you're talking about 30 megawatts a year, give or take, that's about 6 5 megawatt solar arrays. If this law
At 25, the 5 megawatts was that the 25 acre figure?
yes,
Okay, so it's 300 acres a year.
yeah, something like that. And so if you are looking at those 6 arrays, and instead you say, okay, they can't be more than 1 megawatt, then you're looking at 30 arrays instead. So over a decade, that's 300 sites with solar versus 60. You're not actually reducing the amount of farmland conversion, you're just spreading them. I also wanted to touch on the life cycle greenhouse gas assessment that's required in section 10. I want to be very clear. I know there was a conversation about, is that already required for most development? It is not. This would be a unique requirement specifically on solar. There certainly are greenhouse gas analyses that are required, environmental analyses that are required. This is a much higher bar that would be much more expensive to meet because it is a full life cycle cradle to grave assessment on a site by site by site project.
And I think a lot of that might have come from that. Those are a lot of the claims that the solar people are making. So it's like almost like you already have that information available. And we would just be asking that you share that information with us because you're already making those claims. And so why not just show us what you're doing?
Understood. The difference is the way the bill is written, it requires a site by site analysis of every component from its, the mining of the iron to get the steel, to manufacture the steel, to turn it into mounting, to ship it. That's what this bill requires. What we have is a very clear understanding of the life cycle impacts on a greenhouse gas basis of solar and other energy sources. This is again the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. I know that the text is small. This is on your site. The red circle on the left, red oval on the left is solar photovoltaic. The red circle on the right is natural gas. I circled natural gas because in New England, the marginal emissions, if we use 1 extra kilowatt hour, it's almost certainly coming from gas. And so it's really solar to gas. That's the fairest comparison here. So obviously you can see natural gas is a lot higher. I won't dwell on that. For solar, the point I want to really emphasize here, if you see, if it's all right, I'll stand up for a second. This blue section here, the top of that blue is 3/4 of all of the analyses in here. So if you're looking at solar here, essentially almost all of the analyses of solar life cycle emissions are, as you can see, very close to zero. Obviously, there are real emissions and there are better and worse projects. But from our perspective, requiring every single solar project in the state, I see nothing in this that would exempt small rooftop arrays, your neighbor putting 10 panels on their roof. They have to hire an engineering firm to do a life cycle assessment of the impacts of those 10 panels. to have every single solar project in the state tell you whether they're amazing, good, great, or pretty good, when we know that all of them are a significant benefit to the state of greenhouse gas emissions. This doesn't make sense. And again, most of those costs would be passed on to ratepayers because the renewable energy standard requires that this power be purchased. I'm almost done.
You're fine.
The last thing I wanted to touch on is, you mentioned, Senator, Chair, we have plenty of land, but prime ag land is really a top concern. The way this bill is constructed, because it covers forest land and ag land, it covers almost the entire state. Once you subtract out water, wetlands, developed land, forests, and ag, you're left with about 3% of the state that's in a category called other perennial vegetation. I'm sorry, I don't have a source here. This is the Agency of Agriculture, I believe. I threw this in at the last second when you made that comment, so it's not in the version online. I'll share another version with the source. So this is our concern, that this is not, well, it's a component of our concern. This is not a bill that is laser focused on prime ag land. That's about 380,000 acres in the state. It's a bill that covers almost all the land in the state. Even just the agricultural land definition in the bill is 1.35 million acres in prime, primary, which is prime and statewide. And then an additional number that I don't know, which is the local importance, that could be up to 450,000 acres. It's in a sort of separate category. So you're talking like 1.5 million acres of agricultural land, only 380,000 of which are prime agricultural soils. And then almost all the other land in the state being taken up by the other restrictions. So bottom line from where we sit, Section 10 of 323 results in higher costs for solar, all solar, including residential and all the rest. Higher costs overall for ratepayers by eliminating the cheapest distributed solar, fragmenting solar development without actually reducing prime or ag land conversion, and hundreds of millions additional dollars that ratepayers are paying. So we do have a few suggestions if we're interested in trying to reduce the amount of ag land that's converted for solar. One, as a general rule, we strongly favor a balanced approach that has small, medium, and large solar in the mix. Right now, our policies are really incentivizing small solar net metering and these 5 megawatt projects, and really not a lot. We had programs that incentivized the sort of medium-sized projects. Those are gone away. We could come up with some new version of that.
That's to incentivize.
Incentivize require. I mean, there's different ways of going about it, but right now we essentially have the renewable energy standard, which drives solar to the cheapest end of the spectrum, which is 5 megawatt projects. And we have net metering, which is rooftop backyard, maybe a small business having a 2-acre array or something like that. So a more well-rounded picture that has different sizes. Incentivizing or otherwise driving development towards dual use or agrivoltaic that you've just heard about from the agency. We are all for that. It is an emerging space that's very promising. This bill might result in some additional agrivoltaic construction, but because that's going to be higher cost, really what we need is a program that in some way incentivizes it. Similarly, solar parking lots, brownfields, landfills, etc., like marginal land that really can't be used for other stuff. We have pushed very hard over the years for programs that drive solar towards those locations. Again, the reality is those are more expensive locations to build. If you're putting solar in a parking lot, that's amazing, but it's a lot of steel. It's trenching through pavement. It's a lot of concrete. It's a more expensive system to build than building something in a greenfield. That's just the reality of it. So one, there's going to be a rate impact, but we need to balance that with the land use impact of not doing that. And two, you need something to actually put a carrot out there to make it financially viable for those kinds of things to be done. Absent that, you gravitate towards 5 megawatt greenfield projects because they're the cheapest to build. And then last, and I recognize that this is not something that everyone in this room is going to be a big fan of. If we want a more diverse energy system that is not so reliant on solar on greenfields, not having a ban on wind in the state would be a good step forward.
Or we can just burn more natural gas. I mean, that.
That would also
and
do it.
around.
We would not support that. As
Yeah,
you might
well, I figured that. I want to ask you a question because you're the only one in the room that probably could answer this, and I don't even know if you're the right one to answer it. But it goes along the lines of where Senator Heffernan was having questions with the Agency of Agriculture is why would solar why would you guys be exempt from the 3-acre rule when everybody else has to comply? And I get it, because I know your answer is going to be, well, because it's going to cost us more. But we spend a lot of time and our farmers work very, very hard to comply with 3-acre rules and water runoffs and all of that stuff. And why would you folks be exempt from having all that fun as well?
Generally, as a state policy, we have, and I understand that this is not perhaps something you support, all electric generation, transmission, distribution going through, well, let's just focus on generation. Section 248 of Title 30. Most of Act 250 is incorporated into that. It is not identical to Act 250. Electricity is something that is sort of integral to modern life, and we have decided as a state to have a specific lane for it to go through that is regulated by the Public Utility Commission, which has expertise in electricity usage. I am not an expert on the 3-acre rule. I understand that you may be hearing from other environmental organizations that have more expertise in that space, so I can touch base with them and let them know you asked that. That's what I figured right now.
Thank you, Ben. How does VPERG feel about all these big fields going in and the power not staying in Vermont, that we're getting carbon credit, that we're not getting to use the energy that we're creating, the sun is shining on Vermont?
Yeah.
How, VPERG is very much for Vermont. How can you be, what's the thought there? Are they good with it? Because that's one issue I do have, is that we have big companies coming in, putting in very large fees, and then that power goes for somebody's lists.
We are not big fans of that. To be fully blunt, I will say our proposal wouldn't be to ban it. I'm going to say sort of two broad things. They're going to feel like they're pushing in different directions. They are to a degree, but I think they're both very valid. One, there's really nothing else that Vermont produces that we are offended by somebody else trying to buy. If Vermonters have a dairy farm and they produce milk and they sell it out of state, nobody says, how dare you not sell it to Vermonters? If you're logging your land, how dare you send that timber out of state, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think that's valid. But
Counterpoint to that,
sure,
that if we didn't produce enough milk to feed our own, which we more than do,
Mhm.
that milk probably would not leave the state. So we're not chewing up all the power that we could chew up all the power that these solar fields are making.
yes.
That's my.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me get to the second half of that point. Again, I think the first is valid. But the second part is VPERG strongly believes it has for a very long time that as a state, we should be producing as much power as we can. For a very, very long time, we have relied primarily on other places to shoulder the burden of the power that we're using. Coal fields in West Virginia, gas from Pennsylvania, on down. And so, yeah, it bothers that we have very large solar arrays going in and just shipping the power out of state, shipping all the benefit out of state. There are certainly things that could be done to make that less likely. One reason that we were so supportive of the part of the renewable energy standard that requires regional new renewables that don't have a size cap, that second 20% that I mentioned earlier, is it makes it much more likely that something, I assume you're talking about these 20 megawatt solar arrays, because most of the 5 megawatt solar arrays are actually solar utilities, that if larger solar arrays being built in Vermont, there's now a market for that power. There's a requirement on utilities that they get power from arrays. And that for the second 20% tranche, an array like that actually could meet their requirements there. So those arrays I could see, and we certainly would hope that over time, they stop selling power to Connecticut, Massachusetts, or wherever else, and start selling power to fine utilities. I'd also be entirely fine with having a differential tax rate for larger solar arrays above that 5 megawatt threshold, and plowing the money back into in-state renewable development or efficiency. I don't believe there's a bill on that right now. And there are not so many of these solar arrays that would be an enormous amount of revenue, but I think it's a reasonable policy conversation to have.
Okay, I wanna continue on unless we have any more questions for Ben. Ben, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Great testimony. We appreciate it very much. I'm gonna skip over just a few people that are, because I just want to get to some folks that we've got in there, and I'd like to start with Jesse McDougall. I think I saw you online. Jesse? Well, we'll come back to you. We have Dan Kenny, Lone Oak Farm, Royalton.
Right. In full disclosure, I used to own Catamount Solar.
Yeah.
Amongst only workers cooperative. And I checked the records the other day. I'm not involved with them at all anymore, but I think there's 33 full-time employees.
You state your name, Matt, for the.
The same name as introduced, Dan Kinney. I'm now a farmer. I own 300 acres down in Royalton. I do have a 500-acre solar farm on one of the properties that helps pay the taxes. Between the rows, we're planning on planting high bush blueberries to have a pick your own operation, which will hopefully help me in my retirement.
Did you say 500 acres?
500. That's about 500 kilowatt.
Oh, 500 kilowatt. Okay, I got it.
I own 300 some odd acres.
Okay, so, okay.
And that 500 kilowatt had to get taken out of current use. I have to pay money to do that, even though it's going to be agrivoltaics. So it's still going to be farmland. And I feel like that's a crime that I had to pay to take it out. And the town was very excited about me doing that job because it was going to still be farmland.
About how many acres, Dan, is that on the 500 kilowatt? Is that?
Well, they made me take 7 out, but if you do a bird's eye view and count panels, it's literally an acre footprint of actual solar panels.
Okay. So you're 500 megawatts on an acre of land.
Yeah, 3 acres is what the fenced in area is.
Okay.
But I'm mostly here, because it just doesn't feel like, what comes up in my mind is that flag, don't tread on me. Like, I pay taxes on that land. I've got other property that I would like to do another 500 on. The state needs it. The workers need it. It's good work. Guys that used to work for me. They came right out of high school. We had a track to get them to be electricians. They're all buying houses. They're all paying taxes. They're all having kids. Vermont needs all of that.
Here we do. We just lost 1,800 people in the last year. So
Yeah.
we agree with you.
So I just don't like what I read, at least when I read the law or the proposal. Was like, wait a second, if I want to put a dollar store in, it looks like I have an easier pathway than I do to do this solar farm. And why is that? I mean, I've been around solar for going on 30 years. I have seen jobs get taken out. And the land is very reclaimable.
It's been part of a field being, how big? How many acres?
It's small, probably an acre.
Yeah.
But it's very much, the gentleman who was speaking before me, Ben, it is expensive to do it over a parking lot. I've put those bids together, and we never win those bids. It would be great if we did, but the infrastructure to do solar over a parking lot is very expensive. And not a lot of production with that expense. With the same expense on a field, you could have another 100 kW worth of production. But my big rub with this was just the feeling of, wait a second, I pay taxes on this land, I steward it. I don't want to be so pompous to think that I know exactly what's best, but I do think I know what's good as a land steward for the property. Right, like right now, that 500 kilowatt piece allows my former wife to live on that land, and I still farm it. But she's got a 25-year lease that more than pays the taxes. And I think there's a lot of farmers that could use that.
When you chose the field, did you choose it because it was close to the power line, or it would be out of view, or what determined when you decided to pick where you were going to put your solar?
I don't think it would be considered exactly prime ag, but according to this bill, I think no matter where it was, it would have the same.
But you as the farmer,
When I
Yeah.
chose that field, it was a lesser field. It wasn't my biggest field. We cut trees around it to open up the sun, and got like 30 cords of firewood off of it. And, so
so basically you took
Yeah,
a field that wasn't as productive and said, hey, I'm going to use it
I'm
for
trying
solar.
to turn this into some.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think the point that you make, Dan, is very well taken as far as it's your land and all that stuff. But it's the way all of anytime you're gonna put up a structure of any sort that everybody has to deal with as well. It's not just that they're picking on you because you want to put solar. Anybody who is going to put a building on of that right there is gonna have to make those same decisions, pay those same taxes, and go through the same permits and go through the same thing. So it's not really picking on you
Not
any
in
different.
Burlington,
Excuse me?
not in Burlington.
I think everywhere,
The zoning is very non-existent.
well, we have 102 towns in, I think 102 towns in the state that don't have zoning, but yet with this Act 181 that they have going on, the LURB, land use review board and all that's going on. All of those decisions now are being, you're gonna have to make those same decisions and your same costs and all of that. So it's coming. If it's not right there right now, it is coming. So it's not unique to anyone that wants to put up solar, that it's my land, and I hear you, believe you me, as you heard me say, I've had my own land and a lot, a couple hundred acres or more at several different times in my life. And I would be as bothered by it as anyone. So, but I do hear you. But also anybody who's going to put up a project that's going to be deemed somewhat commercial is going to have those same issues that you've dealt with as well. People are going to come in and tell you what you can and cannot do. So it's not just a solar issue.
Sure, so that's fine. Your question about where I chose, we had to run 3-phase power off the road, and the solar company that developed it, Norwich Technology, they paid for that. And so there's one piece that's going on with solar production in the state, and that our infrastructure is getting a little bit of a help in being fixed. I know since they put that 3-phase up that road, nobody's lost power on that road.
So you chose that. So is it out of view of most of the public? Like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
so,
I mean,
and this is what I
say it.
think this is what this whole committee and what everybody's searching for, that we're all for solar. But like, again, Lowell, it's right in the middle of town. And they're like saying, God, we really don't want that. So then all the neighbors, it'd be just like, no different in Essex when Amazon wanted to build a new facility up there. the town people said no, and it's like, what are you saying no for? But they didn't want it in their town. They could have put solar on the roof, could have been great, but they turned it down. So as a farmer, I used to be a dairy farmer as well. It's like, it is my property. I should have the right to do it. And if the solar company has the most money, I'd probably sell it to them. But if the town folks or somebody said, we really don't want it, we have the money, then I'd probably go that way. So this is what this committee is torn between. It's giving the farmers their right, but also hearing the public going, when we decide to do this, it should be right for everybody. And you're never gonna have everybody. You're very wise on where you chose yours, to try to keep it out of the view. I've been to many solar, it's like, this is a great spot for solar. And then there's other spots like, why did everybody?
Yeah, and I mean, that's, we could all argue that. I see, I drive and I see the big old car dealership going in on a farm field that ain't ready to make. It's all in the eye of the beholder.
Well,
We
then,
might need wind and you may think it's ugly and I may not like it because it's got moving parts that are gonna break and it will be down more often than solar. But travel outside of this state. There's sometimes, my partner moved here from California and she feels like she lives into a museum. It's like, it's
But
something,
it costs to live in a museum.
and sometimes that museum is holding us back.
So you're in my district, so so obviously your opinion matters a lot to me. And the one thing that I just keep coming back to is, and I know the land isn't really the best land for farming, but if after that's 25 years is gone and we say they want to pull up, do you think you'd be able to farm again?
Oh, yeah.
You would know better than any.
Yeah.
Um,
It's in better shape now than it was before the solar because of the work they did to grade it and get it.
at some point, I would like to visit, and so I'll connect and
Yeah.
with him, because I think that's important and we can.
but in likelihood, being honest with ourselves, I see the value to you to add that. And then, as you said, your other significant other, maybe, or ex or whatever, 25 years of a guaranteed income. And when it comes to renewal time, I don't see you throwing that away.
No, we would negotiate a better lease. But it's,
Good for you.
it may be at a point where it just gets pulled and it turns into scrap metal and all those piles become, the next state truck that's driving down the road, who knows? But it's all recyclable. It's probably come out as quick as it went in.
Yeah, we're gonna move on unless there's more that you've got to say.
No, I appreciate your time and
We appreciate you very, very much. Again, you bring in the insight that's very important to us. We appreciate it.
And a unique perspective of being both a farmer and someone that's
Yeah, somebody's been in the business as well.
So that's very valuable. Thank
yeah,
you.
the only thing I would want to add is to remember the jobs that the solar has brought to the state.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
it's really important.
Absolutely. That's very important. Thank you.
I got a text that I actually have a little scowl, so. Head back to Royalton, but thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Jesse McDougal, we have you now.
You're on mute.
You're trying to figure it
Also
out.
trying to, yeah.
Yeah,
He's trying to figure it out. Pros.
now you're pro. Okay, we'll move along. We keep on trying, yeah. Now we have, okay, he's coming in, okay? Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead. You might
I
be just,
apologize.
go ahead.
Thank you for having me. There are just a few points I'd like to make. The just for the record, I'm Jesse McDougall. I'm a farmer in Shaftesbury. We're a fifth generation family Vermont farm. We're a working farm. I've also taught ecological restoration through agriculture at Bennington College. Our farm, we graze sheep here. And I do support renewable energy development. We are a neighbor to the Shaftesbury solar site. So I have a unique perspective on this conversation, I believe. Our farm sits on a ridge between the Greens and the Taconics. To the west of us is a several 100-acre sand pit, and to the south of us is the proposed several 100-acre Shaftesbury solar site. The developing the $1 billion energy corporation developing Shaftesbury Solar chose the site that they did to the south of us because it was bisected by the regional energy line, and it was cheaper for them to bulldoze the mature forest and scrape the fields there, the old dairy farm fields there, than it was to develop in the in the sand pit on the other side of our property. I don't even know that they considered the sand pit. They found the farm on the regional line to develop. And I'm actually a member of the American Solar Grazing Association. And if I ran the world, the first thing I would do in that sand pit was, if I were charged with regenerating it, was put solar panels in there. The shade would help us speed the biological regeneration of that land. And the point there is, it was cheaper for this energy development company to bulldoze a forest than it was to develop in degraded land and use solar as a way to regenerate it more quickly. And I think there's an important distinction that needs to be made that I hear getting hinted at today, but not explicitly stated, and that is who is developing the solar site. A neighbor of ours to the east, a dairy farmer, called me one day and said he wanted to put solar on his land, and could I talk to him about it? And I went up and I walked his fields, and I was all in favor of it. He wanted to do it in a respectful way. He wanted to do it on a limited scale. He had a great lease and it paid his taxes. And he developed in a way that he could graze our sheep under his panels if we wanted to. And in that way, it was a win-win-win. But the Freepoint Energy, which is an oil commodity, oil company, oil commodities trading company out of Connecticut, has no such plans. Obviously, they're not. It's as any Vermont farmer will tell you, it's always cheaper to build it fast and big than to do it correctly. And I think that the 5-acre limit in this bill is precisely the tool we need to differentiate between those local farmers who want to put solar on their land as a means of income and a means of energy production, because they're the ones who know the land and know how best to do it, or do it to most benefit and least destruction, than these giant solar energy developers or wind developers that do it indiscriminately because it is the cheapest way for them to do it. You know, this Shaftesbury site is right on 7 near the state line, and I was toying with the idea of putting up a big billboard that said, "Welcome to Vermont, the energy capital of Connecticut." Because what I see happening is these companies with the money are buying up vulnerable farms up and down the power lines, and developing it as cheaply as can be developed. And you know, with all due respect to Mr. Shapiro, who I do respect and appreciate his work, I would, he says economies of scale, which has been historically the death knell for a lot of Vermont farms. Vermont does not scale well. We have a beautiful but inefficient rolling landscape. And if we are charging toward economies of scale, it will always be cheaper to bulldoze than it is to build things correctly. Our town has several solar projects owned by the community. It has projects farmers put out on their land. I have solar on my barn roof, done within context and done respectful of the land and the neighborhood and the landscape. I see it as a valuable tool. And yes, it is much more expensive to do it that way per kilowatt, but it's also the right way to do it, in my opinion. And watching, the last point I'll make is watching this Shaftesbury solar site, the solar project, steamroll my town and turn neighbor on neighbor, all of whom want what's best for the environment. But it came down to those who believe technology will save us and those who believe ecology will save us. And it turned very bitter and very contentious, and I was very saddened to see it. But and none of us, but those of us who didn't want to see a farm and forest destroyed were villainized, and at every level, those of us who were fighting against this project were told there's nothing we can do. The town couldn't stop it. The legislature, that's the representatives I spoke to said there's nothing we can do. My hope is that this bill will give us something that we can do so that somebody has some, there is a threshold here for destruction that is untenable. I think family farms in Vermont are vital infrastructure, and just as a ship captain wouldn't destroy the lifeboats because we haven't used them in a while, I think it would be folly to allow these mega corporations to steamroll through Vermont as they did my town. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? We want to thank you for coming in. Very valuable testimony. We appreciate it. Are you with? I don't have you on here. I got some other folks that are okay.
I'm just here for support.
Okay, sounds good. I'm gonna go to Rep Burt. Would you like to have some comment?
You know,
Put your desk away next time.
morning,
Morning.
Representative Craig Burt, for the record. I don't think I got a whole lot that I need to add to what's been said. I will say that a lot of what the gentleman from Beeford referenced was the renewable energy standard. And then in order to meet those goals, we have to do X, Y. We have to do X, Y, and Z. We have to. And, you know, in speaking with a representative from Green Mountain Power, their task was trying to keep our rates as low as they can to our customers in the state. And I'm all for that. We all know we've got some of the highest energy costs in the country. We need to keep them down as much as we can. And so between those goals and between the needs of our citizens for power is done in an affordable way, we're left with putting renewable energy, putting solar panels on the cheapest location possible in the cheapest way. Contrasting that to that we have these renewable energy standards, where are the standards for the working lands for agriculture? Where's the agricultural standard in our statute? Where are the goals for 2030 and 2050 for our working lands and for agriculture? In comparison to the goals that we have outlined for renewable energy, there's hardly anything. That's probably our leading problem. That's why we're coming up against this. That's why I think there are people waking up and saying, we have an issue here that needs to be stopped. We need more guardrails. We need more ways to address this, and we don't have them. We don't have enough language in our statute to protect farmland. We had Act 250 went in place. That was really essentially, as you said earlier, was meant to do that. But renewable energy doesn't go through Act 250. It goes through 248. So we have two options before us. I think we've got to develop more goals for the working lands that makes it clear what the legislature has in mind for our state in terms of its most valuable resource, in my opinion. Our most valuable resource is not renewable energy. It's a need, but it's not necessarily a valuable resource that we have. Our most valuable resource is our land and our people. We need to protect both the interests of those. You have language in front of you right now where I feel like you can move the needle in a direction, and it's hard because we don't have that statute that like renewable energy has to work with to be able to say, oh, we have to meet these goals. Well, I would love to be able to say, well, we also have to meet these goals. We need to develop those. Not going to happen with you guys right now, but I think there is opportunity to move the needle in the right direction. The man that came in, the farmer who's chasing his cow right now, he has his array works. It's under 5 acres, and he put it like you asked. It's on land that's less valuable for crop production. He did it the right way, and he's trying to produce crops in between them. But I think it's also a fantasy to think that we can put up 100 acres of arrays and then say to farmers, okay, now farm in between it. Right? We took the best land that you have, and now go ahead and farm in between the panels and make a living at it. Why are we sacrificing our farmers? We need those other goals. We need goals that align with agriculture to be able to stand up alongside renewable energy. And I think because we don't have those, we're seeing right now we have an opportunity to move the needle in the right direction. You guys are going to figure out the best way. I think that's all I got to say.
Any questions?
More of a statement when you mentioned Green Mountain Power, because I actually have 2 brownfield sites that we've looked at with solar on, and they're attractive to do it, and we're probably gonna do it. However, when we're working with 2 different power companies, Vermont Co-op and Green Mountain Power, Green Mountain Power is all for it. Vermont Co-op's like, we want nothing to do with solar fields. So it's kind of interesting. And each different power company, what their true beliefs are about solar. So you mentioning Green Mountain Power brought that up. It's like, yeah, we'll see more solar where Green Mountain Power is compared to Vermont Electric, some other companies.
I will say that they did say that they pay they're paying 4 or 5 cents from Hydro-Quebec, and then at the best rates that are getting from the larger scale solar is between 6 and 8 cents.
Yeah.
So even if we're trying to get the cheapest possible solar, we're still paying about 50% to maybe 70% more. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I want to bring in Allison Despothy. Did you want to add
Well, I was
anything?
gonna actually offer, I know Annette has some good information.
Okay, then let's go with
And then
Annette
I
then.
could also go tomorrow or Thursday, depending on your schedule, because I know you guys are cutting into it.
Okay, what's Annette?
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Well,
You've
I'm
got-
so-
You've got about 12 minutes or so, Annette.
thanks for asking. I want to thank the committee for having this discussion. This is so incredibly important and long overdue, and I hope that you will find a way to keep the conversation going. I have a few comments to offer on specific things. One, I have to do this. I hope you'll forgive me. Steve Collier mentioned Act 248. This is a correction I give to a lot of people. Act 248, I think, is the mental health confinement law. So we're talking about 30 VSA Section 248, and a lot of people get those confused. I've heard comments that this is singling out solar, but this legislation is proposing changes to section 248 that governs all electricity generating projects. So it also relates to power plants, gas pipelines, transmission lines, wind, anything that is regulated that is an energy generation project. And so this is not singling out solar. This is putting in standards that would affect all projects. A couple of years ago, we went through a process in Senate Finance Committee because Senate Finance has the, it's the, excuse me. Well, I don't know if I can do this.
Okay.
I was afraid I'd lose my voice. All right, I'll try. The Senate Finance Committee is the committee of jurisdiction over the PUC. And the renewable energy industry came in and said that they wanted to eliminate aesthetics from this part B5, section 248. And we showed that there was no issue with the intervention of the public and that it would have affected all projects. And so the bill never made it out of committee.
Yeah, Annette, why don't we let you have a break here? And I just also want to, you're good, you're here to listen, okay. Yes, we'll let you take a break on it. We'll chat with you tomorrow. Would that be okay?
That would be much better. Thank you.
Sounds good. Allison, come on.
Okay, thank you. So Allison Despathy, Vermonters for Earthling Environment, thank you so much for having me. And as Annette said, just thank you for this conversation. It is long overdue. Annette tried very hard to have this conversation when the renewable energy standard was being developed, because you could see this is going to be a big issue and why don't we get ahead of it? And unfortunately, that did not happen. So just a few things. One, I think it's important to recognize, and I think Ben took off, maybe Steve could correct me on this, but when they talk about the acreage that's in solar right now, I really think, and we have to confirm this, that 410 acres is just referring to the top of the post. So we're not talking about the whole coverage, because when they talk about impervious surface, they're talking about just the top of the post. So they don't count the panel. And this is why the 3-acre rule oftentimes doesn't apply. So what this starts to bring me into is the massive incentives that the renewable energy industry has right now, and how this is then conflicting with this private property piece. Because if they did not have these incentives, I do not think we would see these projects coming. And Senator Perchlik and I had a conversation probably this summer, because he used to be the head of Renewable Energy Vermont. And he said, oh yeah, we got those incentives put in place because we were trying to bring it forward. Well, now it's here and they're doing fine. And so the question is, if we were to get to the root of the problem, it would be, we need to correct these incentives and correct the renewable energy standard. But right now there's not an appetite for that. There's bills, in different committees, and they are not being taken up to really sort of correct this problem at its root. So where that leaves us is, what can we try to do to, and keep in mind, this isn't banning anything. All this is doing is giving the tools to the Public Utility Commission so they can have these in-depth conversations with all of the parties involved. So they could have the developer, they could have any of the neighbors, the interveners come to the table and say, okay, what's going on here? Let's talk about this. Let's go through this process. This is the section 248 process. And it's also much more difficult than an Act 250 process in the sense of you need money and lawyers to participate. So these big developers have money and lawyers. Act 250, the neighbors, the community, they could come to the table much easier. This is incredibly legalistic and difficult for people and towns to get into. I don't know if you guys had a chance to see Margaret Cheney's concurring opinion in the Shaftesbury decision, but you could see she was asking Vermont, is this what you want us to do? You want us to cut down 40 acres of forest in Shaftesbury with 36 acres of mature forest. Is this what you want us to do? do you want us to set up these projects where then the power is gonna go out of state to Connecticut and Mass so they can meet their renewable energy goals? Is this, and so this was her concurring decision. This is a concurring opinion. This bill, which I have some changes that come to, I think, some of the issues that have come up. This is a response to that. They need more tools. So if they have tools where they could take into account, where's the power going? And this is one of the things that came up in her opinion, is she said, they don't have a power purchase agreement right now. Is this power staying in Vermont? Where's this power going to? Who's buying the RECs? So I think these are some of the issues that we're looking at, and we just want to make sure that the PUC, and Senator Major, you said this the other day, you guys want to do what's in the best interest of Vermont, for the environment of Vermont, for the people of Vermont. This allows them to have the tools to make those decisions. Who is this going to serve? Where is the power going? What's impacted, and how do we address those issues? So I just want to come back also to understanding a little bit, and I don't need to get into the weeds on it, but I just want you guys to have a sense. Every lister, appraiser, or assessor that I've talked to in Vermont gets so mad because when there's a renewable energy project for solar, what do they have to do? They click on the box, exempt from education tax. They're not paying education tax. They pay what's called a uniform capacity tax, which you talk to any lister or tax person is a pittance. It's $4 per kilowatt over a 50 kilowatt. So the project that, I'm so sorry, the farmer who was in here chasing his cow, the project that he talked about is a 500 kilowatt. He would pay as a uniform capacity tax $2,000 every year, doesn't go up, and that would be rated at about 1.5 billion in 1.5 million in value. Can you imagine if you had a commercial business that was rated at 1.5 million and you had a locked-in tax rate of $2,000 a year? Hadn't changed since 2007, 2011. I mean, can you imagine if our property taxes didn't go up? So this is just an example of one of the incentives that they have. There is a bill in Ways and Means that would bring up the uniform capacity tax, because again, Senator Perchlik said this was put in place to incentivize this, but it has not changed. So they're getting a massive break on education tax. That does go to the education fund, I should say. They also get a locked-in property tax rate. And Thomas Hand had mentioned this. The land is valued before the project's on it. So can you imagine again, if you had a commercial business and your land was there and that's what it was valued at, and that's what you were taxed on versus the entire business that's on top of that. So they're getting property tax breaks, education tax breaks. They've got a renewable energy standard that forces the utilities to buy this power from them, right? Even if it's more expensive for Vermonters, and even if it goes onto, destroying some of this environment. So we've set up this entire pathway for companies like Frequent Commodities. And Annette mentioned they have a checkered past. They have paid $98 million in fines for money laundering and bribery. This is who and they've also paid fines to Romania energy regulator. This is who we're bringing into the state, because we basically rolled out the red carpet and say, you're not going to pay much on education tax. You're going to get a locked-in property tax. The utilities have to buy this stuff, or you could sell it out of state, like the place with Coolidge Solar, right? So the Lowell Solar situation, bless you. The Lowell Solar situation is, again, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. 80, 90 acres, half ag land, half forest that was cleared. It all goes to Connecticut. They get the power, they get the renewable energy credits. And the other thing that I want to add to this is we have no idea what they're making. So they could go to the PUC. This is what we need to get for, for the kilowatt per hour. And the PUC has to go through that. But every single utility in this state lays it all on the table. BEC, Green Mountain Power, this is what we make. This is what we spend. This is what we think the rate should be. Whereas you've got these solar developers hooking on a massive scale, and we have no idea. There's no regulation for what are your profits, how much are you making on these RECs? There's no transparency around it. So there's a lot of incentives, plus the federal subsidies. You can see Shaftesbury was pushing hard because they wanted their 20 million for the federal money before that stuff went away. And so this is the situation we've created, and this is where we've landed in here with the PUC needs more tools. They need to be able to make a judgment that would be in the benefit of Vermont, whatever that means, in the benefit of the farmer and the benefit of the town and the benefit of the power that we need here, they need the tools. And I will say, my husband and I go round and round on this because he's like, private property, it's private property, it's private property, and that's his thing. And I'm like that too. But if this stuff didn't have the incentives in place, it wouldn't be happening. And that's where, until we can rectify that situation, I think we need to give the PUC the tools so they can try to make these decisions for, does this project make sense? Is it in the best service of Vermont? And where do we land there? There's a few other pieces, but I
I
don't
think you
there's
made the
questions.
point well with that.
Okay,
Good job.
So any questions for Alice?
and it's lunchtime, so
Well,
just in
I just
time.
want to just take a few more minutes. I don't have any more witnesses on my list. Was anybody, oh,
Chris.
I know Adam says he's fine. You're fine, right, Adam?
Sure.
Okay, or no, you're allowed,
Oh, no, Mr. Chair, I'm here all the time and
you're more than welcome to come up.
I'm on your agenda, so I want to be loyal to the committee.
Come on up.
I come up
Yeah,
here.
please, sir.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, Annette will be able to get in. I know she'll have some helpful info for tomorrow or something.
Okay,
Hopefully, if that's okay. Thank you.
yes.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Adam DeCrassi Group, here with Renewable Energy Vermont, subbing for Peter Sterling, who's
Yep.
naturally on school break, time away. And so I'm only going to add a small thing to the discussion. Because I think you're having a go deep dive on this conversation. One or two things. For Renewable Energy Vermont, been with them a long time. Mindful that this is intersection of energy policy, land use change, the environment, private property rights. There's been a lot of tension and work that's gone into these laws over the last 15 years. And I'm one that understands, that while our message is we don't own the weight of the ag soils that necessarily are being placed upon this from a scale perspective, I do understand it's appropriate scrutiny. We're here to answer the questions. We think we have good answers. I should note Renewable Energy Vermont's membership does not include the major industries that's developing the project, the large project. So I'm not here to discuss them at all. I think we're the smaller scale folks. One point of information, then off to lunch, which is it's electricity is such a complicated topic. And when we talk about the power, there's two things about the electric markets because we're in a regional grid. Generation of the kilowatt flows onto the pole and to the use. It's the power purchase contracts that are separate from. So when we say power is going out of state, kind of unlikely. Electrons go onto the system and then travel to their use very quickly. ISO New England ensures that the tub is full of electrons. Then they have a market where all the contracts go in to make sure it's reconciled, that it's all paid for and contracted. So it's really these two tubs that sit next to each other. I don't mind the conflation because it's natural to see who's buying it as the user of it in this market. But what I do know is that we're trying to build a strong, local, resilient grid that has distributed generation that's here, like efficiency. It reduces savings on the lack of need to build more infrastructure. And like development, every project's controversial and every project is in some way needed. And they're all in Vermont subject to unusually strict regulation.
Oh, you have, sir?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, we've taken it right down to the last minute. And I want to thank everyone for coming in. Great testimony all the way around. As I've said, we've made no decisions about anything. That's what we've done is take a testimony and just trying to figure out if we've got a path forward. So more to come. So I want to thank everyone for coming and I hope everybody has a great day.